The rumble was a constant, low thrum against my feet, a vibration that seeped into my bones and settled there, a familiar companion to the hollow ache in my chest. I watched the blurred, graffiti-scarred concrete walls rush past outside the window, the only witness to my quiet, self-imposed vigil. I was alone in the empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, casting my reflection in and out of existence. Sometimes, the fluorescent tubes above would hum and dim, plunging the carriage into a sickly yellow twilight before snapping back to their harsh, unwavering glow. In those brief moments of near darkness, the grime on the seats, the scratched plastic, the discarded newspaper on the floor, everything seemed to sharpen, to take on a more sinister edge. Then the full glare returned, stripping away the illusion, leaving only the mundane desolation. I preferred the dimness. It suited the muted landscape of my mind. My parents gone, my sister too. Just like that, a car crash on a rain-slicked highway, a sudden brutal end to the world I knew. My job, a mindless string of data entries for a faceless corporation, had become unbearable. The polite inquiries from colleagues, the pitying glances, they were nails on a chalkboard. I'd stopped going. They hadn't called. I hadn't cared, so I rode, day after day. I picked a random line, boarded a sparsely populated car, and let the train carry me. Destinationless, it was a way to move without effort, to exist without truly living. The rhythmic clatter, the periodic lurch, the mechanical sigh of the doors opening and closing at forgotten stops, it was all a dulling balm. I was adrift, a derelict vessel on a sluggish current, waiting for something, anything, to snag me. The event arrived not with a bang, but with the crisp, official stiffness of a thick envelope. It had been waiting in my mailbox for days, a stark white rectangle amidst a pile of junk mail and overdue bills. The return address was a law firm I'd never heard of, tucked away in a remote corner of the state, miles from anything familiar. I had almost thrown it out, assuming it was another attempt to sell me something I didn't need or a demand for payment I couldn't provide. But something about the embossed letterhead, the formal weight of the paper, caught my eye. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of dust and aged paper clung to it. My hands felt clumsy as I tore open the seal. Inside, a single sheet of heavy parchment, folded precisely, detailed the reveal. I, Seth, was the sole beneficiary of an estate, an ancestral home I never knew existed. A property, the solicitor's letter explained in dry, legalistic terms, that had lain dormant, forgotten by time and family branches for generations. It was remote, decaying, and apparently quite large. The letter mentioned a significant acreage and a structure of considerable historical interest, but offered no photographs, no grand descriptions, just the address, a set of keys, and an invitation to claim my inheritance, or if I preferred, to decline it. A strange burden. That was the phrase that echoed in my mind. Not a gift, not a fresh start, but a burden. Who were these people? Why had I never heard of them? My parents had never spoken of distant relatives, certainly not of an ancestral home. They were city people, practical, grounded. This felt like a ghost emerging from the past, a forgotten limb suddenly twitching with life. The solicitor's letter was polite, professional, but beneath its formal language, I sensed an unspoken urgency, a desire to be rid of this property, this forgotten legacy. I reread the address. A tiny hamlet deep in the forested hills, a place so small it barely registered on a map. The house itself was simply named Blackwood Manor. A shiver traced its way down my spine, despite the stale warmth of my apartment. Blackwood. The name felt heavy, ancient, like a secret whispered in the dark. The next few days were a blur of numb preparation. I sold what little I owned that held any value, packed a single duffel bag with essentials, and withdrew the meager savings from my account. The thought of staying in the city, continuing my aimless subway rides, became intolerable. The inheritance, whatever it was, offered a direction, a purpose, however unsettling. It was a plunge into the unknown, but the known had become unbearable. I had to see it, this house, this forgotten piece of my lineage. I had to understand why it had waited so long to call to me, and why it felt less like a rescue and more like an obligation. What awaited me there, in that remote, decaying structure, so far from the familiar drone of the city? I had been riding this empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, for what felt like hours, circling the city like a lost satellite. Each flash of illumination revealed my reflection, gaunt eyes shadowed, a stranger peering back from the grimy glass. This was it then, the The final escape, the last chance. The solicitor's voice, dry as parchment, echoed in my memory. An ancestral property, Mr. Seth. Quite remote, a substantial inheritance, provided you occupy it. Occupy it, as if it were a tomb, not a home, and maybe it was. The journey north was a blur of highway and then winding country roads, a steady unraveling of the familiar until only the unfamiliar remained. The bus, a rattling metal box of forgotten dreams, deposited me at a crossroads marked by a leaning, moss-covered signpost. From there, a local driver, his face weathered like old leather, took me the rest of the way in a beat-up sedan, the engine groaning under the strain of the steep, unpaved track. Not the city's hushed hum, but a profound, weighty stillness that pressed in on my eardrums. It was the kind of quiet that made I listen for my own breathing, for the beat of my own pulse. Through the gap in the trees, I saw it. The house. Parts of the roof had caved in, exposing skeletal rafters to the elements, and ivy, thick as anaconda coils, strangled the walls, pulling at the mortar, obscuring whatever forgotten ornamentation lay beneath. It was less a dwelling and more a monument to decay, a testament to generations of neglect. This wasn't a fresh start, it felt like an ending. A rusted, wrought-iron gate, half buried in nettles, hung ajar. I pushed it open further, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound like a dying animal. The gravel path beneath my feet crunched loudly, each step an intrusion. The front door was a heavy slab of blackened oak, studded with corroded ironwork. It slid into the lock with a dry click, then turned with surprising ease. The door swung inward on its own, a gust of stale air, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, something subtly sweet like forgotten flowers, but with an underlying bitterness, billowing out to greet me. I stepped inside, my breath plumed in the dim light filtering through the grime-caked windows. A sweeping staircase, its banister carved with intricate, unsettling patterns that looked like grasping hands, dominated the space. Dust lay everywhere, a thick, undisturbed blanket over everything. The checkered marble floor, the heavy draped furniture, the faded portraits on the walls whose eyes seemed to follow me even in the gloom. Cobwebs, heavy with age, swayed gently from the high ceilings, catching the faint light like tattered lace. I walked deeper, my hand still gripping the heavy key. To my left, a set of double doors, slightly ajar, revealed what looked like a drawing room. I pushed one door open. The room was immense, filled with shrouded furniture, a grand piano draped in white like a ghost. I pulled back a corner of a sheet covering a large armchair. The velvet beneath was rough, brittle, and the air around it felt strangely heavy, as if someone had just risen from it. I quickly let the sheet fall back into place. Each room I peered into was a carbon copy of the last in its state of disuse, vast, decaying, filled with the ghosts of forgotten lives. A dining room with a table set for a feast that never happened. A library with shelves full of moldering books, their leather bindings cracked and flaking. Everything felt as if time had stopped here, not just paused, but shattered, leaving fragments of moments suspended in the dust. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound from somewhere above me. I froze. The sound was distinct, like something dragging across a wooden floor or perhaps a chair being slowly pushed. My heart gave a sudden hard thump against my ribs. I strained my ears, but the house had fallen silent again. Even the gentle creak of old wood seemed to have ceased. It was just the house settling, I told myself. An old building, after all. A gust of wind playing tricks, but there was no wind inside. I reached the end of the corridor, where a smaller, narrower staircase spiraled upwards. A soft, sibilant sigh, too faint to make out words, but undeniably there. I stood at the foot of the stairs, my eyes fixed on the impenetrable gloom above. Had I truly heard it? I had no destination, no appointment, just a need to feel the movement, the fleeting illusion of going somewhere. The empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, offered a strange, detached solace. Each sudden lurch jostled me, and the metallic tang of the air, thick with the scent of ozone and stale sweat, filled my lungs. The plastic seats, worn smooth by countless anonymous bodies, felt cold beneath my fingers. I traced the faded patterns, trying to ground myself in the mundane, in the undeniable reality of this rattling metal tube. I tried to dismiss it as the residue of fatigue, a trick of the mind playing catch-up with the past few weeks. The lights flickered again, plunging the car into momentary gloom, then sputtering back to life. I blinked, a dry ache behind my eyes. The journey eventually ended, as all aimless journeys must. The The cool, damp air of the late afternoon met me at the station entrance, a welcome contrast to the stale subway air. I walked the familiar route back to the house, the gravel crunching under my worn boots. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground resisted my return. I pushed open the heavy front door, the groan of the hinges a familiar lament. I tried to shake off the lingering unease, to attribute it to the sheer age of the place, the settling of beams and foundations. The house was a relic, a monument to decay. It creaked, it sighed, it shifted. That was just how old houses behaved. I told myself this, repeating it like a mantra as I moved through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards. I decided to read, to lose myself in the printed word, a small anchor in the rising tide of my own thoughts. I remembered leaving my copy of Moby Dick on the small, scarred table beside the armchair in the living room, pages dog-eared at a particularly dense passage. The book wasn't there. A frown creased my brow. I was certain, absolutely certain. I had been reading it just yesterday evening, before the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the grimy windows in shades of orange and violet. I checked the floor, under the armchair, then behind the heavy velvet curtains. Nothing. A flicker of irritation sparked within me. Had I put it back on the bookshelf? I rarely did, preferring to keep my current read close at hand. I walked to the tall, dust-laden bookshelf that dominated one wall, its shelves crammed with forgotten tomes. My gaze swept across the spines, then stopped. There it was, Moby Dick, not nestled amongst other books, but lying flat on top of a stack of faded atlases, as if placed there deliberately. And it wasn't open to my dog-eared page. It was open to a random page in the middle, its spine cracked further than I remembered. A jolt went through me, sharp and sudden. I hadn't touched it. I knew I hadn't. My rational mind immediately offered explanations. I was tired, I was distracted, I had a momentary lapse in memory. The house was old. Maybe the table was uneven and it had slid. But the atlases below it were perfectly flat, and the book was positioned with a strange neatness. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the rough, yellowed paper. The page it was open to was blank, save for a single smudged fingerprint near the bottom margin. It wasn't mine. My hands were clean, and this print was too large, too indistinct. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped through the pages, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. No other marks, just that one like a solitary stain. The air felt heavy, as if something was pressing in on me, though the room was empty. Was I just seeing things now, imagining things? It wasn't distinct, not words, just a breathy rustle, a suggestion of sound. I spun around, my eyes wide, searching. The curtains hung still, the dust motes danced in the slivers of light, oblivious. My fingers twitched, a sudden urge to drop the book, to flee. But I stood my ground, clutching the heavy volume. This wasn't just the house settling. This wasn't just my imagination, targeted, as if something was playing a quiet, unsettling game, but with whom and why? I sat alone in the empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, the only passenger in the steel coffin hurtling through the city's underbelly. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks was a hypnotic beat, a counterpoint to the buzzing silence of my thoughts. I leaned my head against the cold glass, the chill a welcome anchor. It was a pocket of absolute zero that settled on my lap, then moved up my chest, stealing the warmth from my breath. My teeth chattered, a tiny, involuntary percussion in the cavernous car. This was focused, intelligent. It felt like a presence, a watchful, patient thing. My heart gave a frantic flutter, a trapped bird against my ribs. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks, the exhaustion, the isolation. It had to be. The determination I'd found earlier that day, the resolve to understand, solidified. Running wouldn't solve anything. I had to face whatever it was. A floorboard creaked upstairs, then another, a slow, deliberate cadence that wasn't the house settling. I froze, listening. My hand instinctively went to the heavy iron key in my pocket, a useless gesture of defense. No wind stirred outside, no rodent scurried in the walls. This sound was internal, originating from within the structure itself. My breath hitched, a knot forming in my throat. I moved through the foyer, past the grand, dust-sheeted furniture. The air grew heavy, thick and still, pressing down on me. It felt like walking through water, each step requiring a conscious effort. I pulled my old laptop from my bag, the familiar weight a small comfort, and set it on the dining room table. The screen glowed, a defiant beacon in the encroaching gloom. I began to search. Ancestral home Seth. I typed, then history of street name property. The internet was a labyrinth of dead ends at first. Property records, zoning maps, vague mentions in local historical archives that offered little beyond dates of ownership. I needed more. I needed names. I needed a story. It wasn't a word, not exactly, but a suggestion of sound, like air escaping a sealed chamber. I spun around, my chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. Nothing. I forced myself to look away, back at the screen, my fingers trembling as I typed. Unexplained death street name house. The search yielded a few local newspaper archives, digitized and grainy. A small article from 1903. Tragic accident claims local woman. No, not quite. The house had been here for centuries. I needed to go further back. The house itself held more promise. I remembered the old study. Filled with dusty books and boxes, the estate agent had told me were personal effects. They were probably just old tax documents, but a flicker of hope ignited. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic beat of my heart, and headed towards the study. The air in the study was even heavier, laden with the scent of aged paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood and dried roses. The light from the hallway barely penetrated the room. I flipped the wall switch, but nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out. Dust motes danced in the phone's beam as I swept it across the shelves, illuminating leather-bound tomes and stacks of yellowed documents. My fingers brushed against the rough spines of books, the dry, brittle paper of old letters. In a forgotten corner, tucked behind a heavy oak desk, I found a small, unmarked wooden chest. It was old. The wood warped and splintered, held shut by a rusted latch. My heart thudded against my ribs, a frantic drum. This felt important, too important. It groaned, then gave way with a sharp crack. I lifted the lid, revealing a collection of leather-bound journals, tied with faded ribbons and a small, tarnished silver locket. It wasn't my imagination this time. I needed answers. That house, that oppressive silence. The way the air seemed to thicken and press in on me, it wasn't just old age. There was something else. A history I hadn't been told. The empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, offered a strange kind of solace. Each flash of the fluorescent tubes brought a brief, stark illumination to the vacant seats, then plunged them back into the swaying gloom. My reflection in the grimy window stared back, eyes too wide, a faint tremor in my jaw. I had to know what I'd walked into. The city, when I finally emerged, was a cacophony after the house's profound quiet. Horns blared, feet shuffled, distant sirens wailed. I navigated the familiar streets on autopilot, my mind already fixed on the task ahead. The municipal records office was a hulking brick building, smelling of old paper and dust. I spent hours there, bent over microfilm readers, my eyes burning, sifting through decades of local archives. Property deeds, census records, old newspaper clippings, anything that mentioned the address. The first few hours were tedious, a blur of bureaucratic jargon and dry statistics. Then a name surfaced, not mine, but one associated with the house from the late 19th century, a merchant. The articles were brief, clipped. He'd lived there with his family. Then one day the entire family, the merchant, his wife, their 2 young children vanished. No trace. The house sat vacant for years. The local constabulary had no leads, nothing. I found another entry decades later. A widow described as reclusive had purchased the property. She lived alone for a time. Her will, filed shortly before her death, stipulated the house be left to no one, its contents to be sold off. But it was never sold. It remained, always. As the afternoon light faded, painting the archive windows in hues of bruised purple and orange, I stumbled upon a more recent account. An artist, a painter of grim, unsettling landscapes, had occupied the house in the mid-20th century. His canvases were found, slashed and burned in the studio, the house once again left to itself. Each story was a shard of ice in my gut. A pattern, isolation, despair, disappearance or madness. The house, always the silent, unchanging witness. What had happened to them? What had truly happened? The journey back was a blur of unease. The subway car, no longer empty, felt too crowded, the other faces too close, their mundane conversations a distant hum against the frantic beat of my own thoughts. The air tasted stale, like forgotten secrets. I forced myself to eat, to go through the motions of a normal evening, but the images from the archives looped in my mind. The The vanished merchant, the fragile widow, the mad artist. My own grief, my own isolation. Was I just another iteration in a long line of victims? Sleep offered no escape. I dreamt of the house, but it was different. Vast, impossibly deep. The walls pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, like bioluminescent moss in a cavern. I tried to move, but my limbs were leaden, rooted to the spot. The air grew heavy, pressing down, stealing my breath. They stretched, reached, seemed to coalesce into something that was not there, but felt profoundly present. An immense, sorrowful weight settled on my chest, a despair so profound it wasn't my own, yet it consumed me. It was the despair of generations, a chorus of forgotten cries, a hunger that gnawed at the very fabric of being. I could hear it, feel it, taste the dust and abandonment of countless forgotten lives. Then a voice. It spoke my name. Seth. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering over cold stone, like a forgotten memory trying to break through a wall of ice. It felt like an invitation and a threat all at once. I bolted upright in bed, gasping, my heart racing. My skin was slick with sweat, a shiver running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. My throat was dry. I could still feel the phantom weight on my chest, the echoes of that ancient, sorrowful hum. Was it just a dream, born of the disturbing history I'd uncovered? Or had something followed me back from the city, something that had finally found its way into my sleep? I was a quiet, self-imposed vigil. I watched, or tried to, as the world outside the glass became a smeared, charcoal blur, indistinguishable buildings and an endless, grimy tunnel. The air in the car felt thick and stale, tasting faintly of ozone and old metal. My shoulders ached from the tension I hadn't realized I was holding. The lights flickered. Not a gentle, rhythmic pulse, but a violent spasm, plunging the interior into near-total blackness before surging back with a harsh, buzzing intensity. It happened again and again. Each sudden burst of illumination left a ghost image in my eyes, a negative imprint of the empty seats and the peeling advertisements. I was alone in the empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, a fact that usually brought a strange comfort, a temporary reprieve from the world's demands. Tonight, it felt like a trap. The rumble beneath my feet deepened, shifting from a mechanical thrum to something lower, almost guttural. It vibrated up my spine, a frequency that resonated with the hollow space in my chest. I stared at my reflection in the window, a pale, tired face staring back from the darkness. For a split second, as the light stuttered, my reflection wasn't mine. The eyes were too wide, too black, and the mouth stretched into a rictus grin, a silent, knowing mockery. Then just as quickly, it was me again, my own exhausted features. My breath hitched. It had to be. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the tone was unmistakable, a low, sibilant sneer. I flinched, turning my head sharply. Nothing. Only the vacant seats, the sterile overhead lights, and the blurred passing tunnel. My heart began to drum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached into my pocket, my fingers fumbling for the familiar weight of my phone, a tether to the tangible. As I pulled it out, the screen glowed with a message I didn't remember receiving. It was a picture, a photograph of the ancestral home, but not as I knew it. Below the image, a single word typed in a jagged, distorted font. Alone. I hadn't taken that picture. I hadn't received that message. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. The image pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Was this a trick of the light? A glitch in the phone, my mind playing cruel games? Then the sound started. Not just the subway's roar, but other noises, layered beneath it, impossible and terrifying. A faint, distant weeping. A child's lullaby sung off-key, the voice thin and reedy, seeming to emanate from the empty seat across from me. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block it out, but the sounds only intensified, burrowing deeper into my skull. The weeping grew louder, morphing into a ragged sob, and the lullaby twisted into a mocking dirge. I tried to stand, to move, to get away, but my limbs felt heavy, weighted down by an unseen force. My head swam. The car began to sway with an unnatural violence, not the usual rock of the tracks, but a dizzying, sickening lurch from side to side. It was my own voice, yet utterly alien, laced with a venomous contempt. You never were, you brought nothing, you are nothing. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was what it wanted. To strip me bare, to break me, to make me doubt everything I was. My hands gripped the edges of the seat, gripped tight. The accusations were a hammer blow to my already fragile sense of self. Aimless. Alone. Useless. All the insecurities I'd carried since the losses, all the quiet fears I harbored were being thrown back at me, amplified, distorted, weaponized. The subway car shuddered violently, throwing me forward. My head hit the window with a dull thud. For a moment, the world went white, then dissolved into a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and shapes. When my vision cleared, the interior of the car was no longer a subway. It was the ancestral home, a tall, impossibly thin figure. My eyes burned. My throat was raw. The smell of ozone was replaced by the cloying scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. Was I dreaming? Was this a hallucination? A breakdown of my own mind? How could I tell what was real anymore? The accusations still echoed, a grating symphony in the cavern of my skull. Aimless, alone, useless. Each word had been a shard of ice, burrowing deep, threatening to freeze the last vestiges of my resolve. I'd felt the truth in them, the insidious, familiar truth that had haunted me long before this house, before it. My hands had tightened on the armrests of the heavy, velvet chair, my grip tight. But then a different feeling had surged. Not despair, not surrender, but a cold, hard defiance. No, not this time. I wouldn't let it reduce me to a shell. I wouldn't become another forgotten name in its hungry history. I pushed myself up, the chair scraping loudly against the polished floorboards, a sound that seemed to mock my sudden burst of energy. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the oppressive silence of the house. The air felt thick, cloying, as if resisting my movement. Clinging to my clothes, my skin, I needed to get out. My legs felt heavy, each step a struggle against an invisible current. I stumbled through the echoing halls, past portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me with knowing, ancient gazes. It turned with a groan, and I yanked the door open, gulping in the sharp, cool air of the evening. I didn't look back. I just ran. I don't remember the walk to the station. Only the blur of streetlights, distant hum of traffic that felt impossibly far away, and the urgent need to escape the suffocating presence of the house. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on, a singular purpose driving me forward. I found myself on a deserted platform, the air thick with the metallic tang of the tracks and the faint scent of stale urine. My phone, clutched in my sweating palm, showed a dead screen. Of course. A low rumble vibrated through the concrete beneath my feet. A lifeline, it slowed, the brakes hissing, a mournful sound that echoed in the empty station. The doors slid open with a sigh. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the interior. No other passengers, just me. A wave of unease washed over me, but I dismissed it. Late hour, empty line, it made sense. I chose a seat near the window, the cold glass pressing against my cheek. The train lurched forward, gaining speed, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks a hypnotizing drone. I tried to gather my thoughts, to piece together a plan. I needed to call someone, anyone, the local authorities, a colleague from my old job if they'd even remember me, someone who could tell me I wasn't losing my mind. I pulled out my phone again, pressing the power button repeatedly. Nothing. The screen remained stubbornly black, a perfect mirror reflecting my own pale, anxious face. Then I saw it. In the reflection of the window, just behind my shoulder, a faint shimmer. A distortion in the glass, like heat haze on a summer road, but it was winter. I twisted around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty seats, the yellowed ads, the dull gray floor. When I turned back, the shimmer was still there, a little clearer now. It coalesced not into a figure, but into a feeling, a warmth. You don't have to be alone, Seth. The thought wasn't spoken, but it bloomed in my mind, soft and comforting, pushing away the sharp edges of my fear. It was my own voice, yet not. It felt personal, intimate. A memory flashed into my mind, my grandmother, her hand on my arm, telling me everything would be all right. The scent of her lavender soap, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the pain of her loss, a constant dull ache, suddenly softened, smoothed over. It was like a balm soothing the raw wounds of grief. They don't understand you, but I do. I can give what I've lost. The comfort, the companionship, the peace. The words, unsaid yet profoundly felt, were a siren song. They promised an end to the gnawing emptiness, the crushing weight of solitude. They offered a reunion, a return to a time before the grief, before the house, before the fear. My shoulders relaxed, a sigh escaping my lips. It was so tempting to simply let go, to embrace this soft, warm presence that understood me, that offered solace without judgment. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth envelop me. It felt like a hug, a gentle embrace from someone I had desperately missed. The flickering lights of the subway car seemed to dim, the harsh clatter of the wheels fading into a soft hum. I could almost feel a presence beside me, a gentle pressure on the seat cushion, not threatening, comforting. Then a flicker, a sudden, jarring return of the harsh overhead lights, brighter than before. The hum of the train sharpened into a metallic shriek. My eyes snapped open. The seat beside me was empty. The reflection in the window showed only my own terrified face. My breath caught. What had it just shown me? A memory, a promise, and what did it want in return? The siren song echoed in the hollow spaces of my mind, a melody woven from memories I cherished and futures I'd lost. Reunion, return, end the emptiness. It was a whisper, a promise, a soft, inviting hand reaching out from the shadows that clung to the corners of the house. My shoulders had relaxed. A sigh had escaped. It was so tempting. But then a flicker. The way the floorboards groaned when nothing was there. The scent of ozone and decay where only dust should have been. The mirror that showed me a stranger, gaunt and wild-eyed. This wasn't a reunion. This was a trap, a lure. The entity wasn't offering solace. It was offering oblivion disguised as peace. It wanted me to surrender, to become another echo in its decaying halls, another meal for its endless hunger. No, not me. I wouldn't be another victim. I wouldn't let my grief be weaponized against me. I was determined. I had to fight it or at least escape its immediate grasp. The house was a cage, but the city was vast. I could lose myself there, find a corner where its tendrils couldn't reach. Even if just for a few hours. I needed to breathe air that wasn't stale with ancient malevolence. I grabbed my worn leather jacket, fumbling with the zipper. My hands trembled, not from fear, not yet, but from a desperate urgency. I needed distance. I needed noise. I needed other people, even if just strangers, to ground me, to remind me that the world outside this cursed inheritance still existed. I practically ran from the front door, the old wood groaning behind me as if in protest. Or perhaps a sneer. I didn't look back. My destination was arbitrary, a place to simply be away. The subway. It was a relic, a forgotten artery beneath the city, rarely used this late at night. Perfect. Desolate enough to avoid unwanted interaction, but public enough to feel like an escape from the suffocating intimacy of the house. I descended the grimy steps, the echoing sound of my own footsteps amplified in the cavernous station. The air grew heavier, carrying the metallic tang of old rails and the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth. A low rumble vibrated through the concrete platform. The train was coming. A solitary yellow eye pierced the gloom of the tunnel, growing larger, faster. It shrieked to a halt, a tortured metal groan that scraped against my teeth. The doors hissed open. It was an empty subway car, lights flickering between stations. The sight hit me with an unexpected wave of unease. Not even a lone sleeper. A late-night worker, a lost soul, just me. The seats, upholstered in faded, patterned fabric, seemed to absorb the light, making the space feel even more cavernous. I took a seat near the doors, my back pressed against the cold window, trying to appear nonchalant as if this wasn't a desperate flight. The train lurched forward, gaining speed, the clatter of its wheels against the tracks a hypnotic, unsettling rhythm. Clack, clack, whoosh, clack, clack. A shiver ran down my arms. I pulled my jacket tighter. My breath hitched. It was just the light, just my overactive imagination still reeling from the house. I stared at my reflection in the window, trying to anchor myself. My face, pale and drawn, stared back. Then for an instant, in a particularly long flicker, my reflection changed. The eyes in the glass were not mine. They were too wide, too black, utterly devoid of pupils, like twin pools of absolute nothingness, and they smiled. My heart seized. A gasp caught in my throat, a dry, rattling sound. The reflection snapped back to my own terrified face, eyes wide, mouth agape. The smile was gone. The black eyes were gone. It was just me, just my reflection. My chest heaved. I tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light, the grime on the glass, my own fear playing tricks. But the image had been so clear, so undeniably wrong. The lights didn't just flicker now, they died. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels intensified, becoming a frantic, accelerating drumbeat. I could hear it now too, distinct from the train's roar, a low, guttural hum like a swarm of insects, but deeper, more resonant. It vibrated through the floor, up through my seat, into my very bones. Then a sound, the seat cushion next to me depressed, as if something heavy had just settled there. A wave of profound, suffocating despair washed over me, heavier than any grief I'd known. It was the entity. It had followed me. And then a voice, not with words, but with images, sensations, raw emotions, flooded my mind. You thought you could leave. You thought you could escape what you carry, what you are. The despair deepened, mixed with a crushing sense of futility, of being utterly, hopelessly alone. You are mine, Seth, you always were. My eyes were wide, staring into the blackness, searching for any outline, any flicker. My hands were balled into fists, nails digging into my palms, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped by the sheer, overwhelming weight of its presence. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just an entity tied to a place. It was with me. It was in me. And the city, the vast, impersonal city, offered no refuge. There was nowhere left to run. The train roared on, faster and faster, a metal beast carrying me deeper into the earth, deeper into its inescapable grasp. The lights remained dead. What would happen when the train finally stopped, if it ever stopped? Would the doors open to the familiar grime of a station, or to something else entirely? And if I got off, where would I go, knowing it was still right beside me? My eyes were wide, staring into the blackness, searching for any outline, any flicker. It wasn't just an entity tied to a single tragedy, a solitary ghost. It was something far vaster, far older. The thought, a cold tendril of realization, burrowed into my mind and the walls of the study. The familiar scent of old paper and dust seemed to warp, to stretch, to dissolve. Then the floor beneath me swayed, not the subtle shift of an old foundation, but a rhythmic metallic groan. The air grew stale, thick with the scent of ozone and something vaguely acrid like burnt metal. The oppressive weight remained, but the context shifted violently. One moment I was in the dusty study, the next I was standing, or rather swaying, in an empty subway car. Lights flickering between stations. The sudden transition stole my breath. The car was utterly deserted. The seats, worn and stained, seemed to mock my solitude. Each flash illuminated the car in a stark, momentary brilliance, then plunged it back into a throbbing gloom. The constant rumble vibrated through the floor, up my legs, into my teeth. It was an unnatural quiet for a subway, the kind that screamed of something being terribly wrong. A low hum began, not from the train's mechanics, but from within my own skull. It wasn't a sound so much as a pressure building behind my eyes. The flickering lights outside the windows began to coalesce, to form fleeting images, not reflections, but projections shimmering against the dirty glass. They were ancient, indistinct at first, a vast, primeval forest under a bruised sky, then a stone circle shrouded in mist barely discernible, stood at its center, arms outstretched. The images sharpened, gaining a horrific clarity. I saw hands, gnarled and claw-like, tearing at the earth. It was born of the earth's deepest wounds, not a spirit, not a ghost, but a primal hunger given form. It was the very essence of despair made manifest. The images shifted again, faster now, a dizzying montage. I saw my ancestors, one after another, drawn to the land, to the house. They arrived seeking solace, seeking a new beginning, just like me. And each time, it welcomed them. It fed them false hope, nurturing their loneliness, their grief, their quiet desperation, until those emotions became a feast. My own despair, my own loneliness, it had been a beacon, a siren song. The house wasn't merely its dwelling, the house was its mouth, its digestive tract. The walls themselves were saturated with the lingering echoes of sorrow, a potent brew for the entity. It didn't just consume life, it consumed the pain of life, growing stronger, more defined, more insidious with each generation that succumbed. It needed the house, yes, but more, it needed the lineage. We were its unwitting farmers, cultivating the very emotions it craved, preparing ourselves as the next harvest. The truth hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just a thing that lived in the house. It was a parasitic consciousness that used the house, that used my family, to ensure its eternal, agonizing existence. It didn't want to just kill me. It wanted to twist me, to wring out every last drop of my sorrow, to feed on my unraveling mind before it consumed what was left. I was not just a victim, I was a meal meticulously prepared. The images on the window dissolved, replaced by my own distorted reflection, thin and pale, eyes wide with horror. It was watching me. It had shown me this, not out of mercy, but out of a perverse pride, a gloating display of its power. The subway car lurched violently, throwing me against the pole. My determination, which had been a flickering ember, threatened to be snuffed out by the sheer, crushing weight of this revelation. Could I fight something so ancient, so fundamentally tied to the very fabric of despair? Could I possibly sever this lineage, this endless feast, without becoming just another agonizing corpse. The sheer, overwhelming weight of its presence was still a suffocating blanket, but something had shifted. It was tied to me. That thought, sharp and cold, cut through the paralysis. It fed on me. My loneliness, my grief, the raw, open wound of my despair. If I could starve it, I could fight it. I had to leave. Not just the room, not just the house, but its reach. My muscles screamed as I forced them to obey. Every joint felt stiff, as if I'd been held immobile for days. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked a protest, a low moan that seemed to echo the house's displeasure. I moved through the oppressive quiet, each step a conscious act of defiance. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent like dust and old paper, but also something else, a faint metallic tang like distant thunder. I felt it watching, a pressure against the back of my neck, but I refused to turn. I wouldn't give it that satisfaction. My plan was simple: get out. Find a place where its tendrils couldn't reach. I stumbled down the stairs, the banister rough beneath my palm, its wood surprisingly warm. The door swung inward, revealing not the overgrown garden path, not the winding dirt road, but a sudden, jarring change of scenery. I was standing on a tiled platform, the air cool and thick with the smell of ozone and damp concrete. A low rumble vibrated through the floor. An empty subway car, lights flickering between stations, slid to a smooth stop before me. Confusion warred with a strange sense of relief. How had I gotten here? I didn't remember leaving the house, much less descending into a subway system, but the urgency to escape, to breathe air untainted by its presence, was paramount. I stepped inside. The car was spotless, unnervingly so. No discarded newspapers, no scuff marks on the floor, no graffiti defacing the windows. Just rows of vacant plastic seats, a sterile, silent expanse. The doors closed behind me with a soft pneumatic sigh. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the confined space. I passed window after window, but all I saw was a blur of blackness, punctuated by the occasional flash of distant, unidentifiable lights. Where were we going? I chose a seat near the middle, facing the front. My breath hitched. This wasn't right. This wasn't an escape. The rumble intensified, a deeper, guttural sound that seemed to emanate not from the tracks, but from the very structure of the car itself. It was a groan, a sigh, a hungry murmur. A shiver traced a path down my spine, raising gooseflesh on my arms. I looked out the window again, desperate for a landmark, any sign of a station. Nothing, just the relentless, blurring black. It wasn't my own. It was tall, impossibly thin, stretched and distorted, standing just behind me. I spun around, a choked gasp catching in my throat. There was nothing there, just the empty seats. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. My vision swam. The air grew heavy again, thick and cloying like breathing through a damp cloth. The metallic tang was stronger now, mixed with something else, something sweet and sickly like decaying flowers. The car continued its endless journey, the lights flickering, fading, then flickering back to life, weaker each time. I was trapped. This wasn't a real subway. This was its creation, its extension. Every rhythmic clatter of the wheels, every flicker of the dying lights, every shudder of the car was designed to wear me down, to isolate me, to feed the gnawing despair it craved. It knew my every move. It had anticipated me. The journey stretched on, an eternity in the sterile, flickering confines. My determination, so fierce moments ago, began to fray at the edges. Was this what it wanted? To break me, to make me beg for the oblivion it offered. When I opened them again, the car was still moving, but the blackness outside was no longer featureless. Faint, ghostly images began to appear, shifting and coalescing. Faces, distorted, weeping, their mouths open in silent screams. My family, my losses. The entity was projecting my grief, amplifying it, feeding it back to me. I was screaming, I realized, a raw, choked sound lost in the rumble of the car. My body trembled, a violent tremor that shook me to my core. I was so alone, so utterly, hopelessly alone. Was this the ultimate trap? To be given the illusion of escape, only to be dragged deeper into its suffocating embrace, where my very memories became its weapons, my loneliness, my grief, the raw, open wound of it all. The realization had been a spike driven deep, pinning me to a truth more terrifying than any phantom shadow. It wasn't just the house. It was me. And then, the floor beneath me gave way. Not a collapse, but a strange, sickening lurch, like stepping into a void that swallowed sound and light. I didn't fall. I simply arrived. The rhythmic clatter and groan of machinery vibrated through the floor, a low hum that resonated in my teeth. My eyes, still struggling to adjust, took in the immediate surroundings: an empty subway car, lights flickering between stations. The train carriage was utterly deserted, not a single other soul. The question was a distant echo, drowned out by the rising tide of sensation. My head swam. The world swayed, mimicking the gentle rock of the train. It was a dream, surely, a nightmare. The flickering lights grew more erratic, plunging the car into longer stretches of blackness. In those moments, the sounds intensified, the ceaseless grinding of the wheels against the tracks, a high-pitched whine that scraped along my nerves, a low, guttural rumble that felt less like machinery and more like a growl. It wasn't coming from the train, it was coming from inside the car, from everywhere. A pressure began to build, not on my chest, but behind my eyes, a tightening band around my skull. It felt like my mind was being squeezed slowly, deliberately. Memories, fragments of loss, began to surface unbidden. My mother's distant laugh, now thin and brittle. My father's strong hand, now just an ache in the air. Faces of friends, growing dimmer, fading into the perpetual twilight of my own isolation. The entity was here. It had followed. No, it hadn't followed. It was here. It had brought me. It was feeding. It wasn't just sadness. It was a physical sensation of being drained, as if my very essence was being siphoned away. My skin tingled, then grew numb. The train rushed on, a relentless journey through nothing. The flickering lights pulsed faster, like a failing heart. You are alone. You always have been. You always will be. The words weren't spoken aloud, but they unfurled in my mind, perfectly formed, utterly convincing. They wrapped around the raw edges of my grief, twisting them, sharpening them. I felt a profound weariness settle over me, heavy as concrete. Why fight? Why struggle? What was there to fight for? The entity offered oblivion, an end to the ceaseless ache. It promised peace, a final quietude where the memories couldn't sting, where the loneliness couldn't gnaw. My body slumped against the seat. I felt my breath growing shallow, my muscles loosening, my will dissolving like sugar in hot water. This was it, the final consumption, the ritual of my undoing. The train was my coffin, rattling me towards a destination I didn't want, but felt too weak to resist. The entity wasn't just taking my pain, it was taking me, all of me. But then a prickle. It wasn't a grand revelation. It wasn't a forgotten memory of heroism or love. It was just a stubborn refusal, a simple animalistic defiance. The thought of ceasing to exist, of becoming nothing, scraped against something deep inside me, something that had survived everything else. I had been alone before. I had grieved. I had been adrift. And I had still been. It amplified the emptiness, the fatigue. My vision swam. The rhythmic clatter of the train became a deafening roar, like 1,000 voices screaming my failures. Give in, it's easier. I closed my eyes, not in surrender, but in a desperate attempt to shut out the sensory overload. I focused on that tiny spark, on the quiet, unyielding core of myself that simply didn't want to cease. I remembered the feel of warm sun on my skin, the taste of a bitter coffee, the satisfying click of a pen. Small, mundane things, things that were mine. Things that represented my individual existence, however quiet or solitary. I pushed back, not with a shout but with a silent, ironclad no. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms, a sharp, grounding pain. My breath hitched, then deepened, a ragged intake of stale subway air. The subway car was still there, the lights still flickering. The entity's presence was still a suffocating blanket, but it hadn't won. Not yet. The train rattled on, still rushing into the unknown. But where was it taking me? And how much longer could I hold on? The click wasn't a sound at all, not in the way I understood sound. It was an internal snap, sharp and sudden, like a tumbler's in a lock turning or a circuit completing. It was the moment I stopped merely enduring and started pushing back. I remembered the grit of the old coffee mug in my hand, the sharp tang of the dark roast, the way the morning sun used to warm the back of my neck, chasing away the chill. These weren't just memories. They were anchors. Tiny, defiant sparks against the encroaching tide of cold, silent despair. I opened my eyes. The sensory overload was gone. The crushing weight had lifted, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum that resonated through my bones. I was sitting on a hard, plastic seat, molded and scarred with generations of neglect. I was in an empty subway car, lights flickering between stations. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed with a sickly yellow glow, struggling against the pervasive gloom. The windows were opaque with dirt and the speed of motion, showing only a blur of indistinct black and gray. There was no one else, just me. The seats were empty, a repeating pattern of faded blue and gray. The handles swayed rhythmically from their poles like skeletal fingers beckoning. This wasn't the house. This wasn't the attic or the cellar or any place I knew. This was something else entirely. A trap, a projection. A space conjured from the depths of a mind that sought to consume mine. My breath hitched. My heart, which had been a frantic drum, now felt like a lead weight in my chest, a dull, slow beat. Where was I going? What was waiting at the next flickering stop? A sudden lurch sent a shiver through me, rattling the old car. The hum intensified, a low growl beneath the clatter of the wheels. It was trying to break me, I knew, to isolate me, to drown me in the very despair it fed upon. It twisted the familiar into the terrifying, blurring the lines. The subway car, a symbol of urban connection, was now the ultimate expression of desolate isolation. I gripped the edge of the seat, my grip tight, my resolve, that fragile, defiant spark, flickered. This wasn't just a vision, it felt real. The metallic tang in the air was real, but I remembered the click. I remembered the warmth of the sun. My voice was thin, reedy, but it was mine. The lights flickered again, longer this time. 1,000 lonely sighs, a chorus of forgotten grief. They clawed at the edges of my mind, promising oblivion, promising an end to the struggle, to the pain. Just let go, Seth, let go, it's easier. My skin prickled with gooseflesh. This was its strongest assault yet, stripping away my very identity. It was trying to make me believe I was alone, truly, utterly alone, with no hope of escape. That was its true weapon, but I remembered. I remembered the research, the old journals, the fragments of stories from the house's previous inhabitants. It fed on loneliness, on grief, on despair. It didn't just reside in the house. It was born from the house's accumulated sorrow, from the echoing emptiness left by generations of loss. The house was its anchor, its wellspring. And I was its latest conduit, its freshest source of misery. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just my despair it wanted to become me, to wear my skin, to inhabit my life, drawing endless sustenance from my memories, my regrets. The subway car wasn't just a trap. It was a manifestation of my own journey towards oblivion, a path it had laid out for me. I clenched my jaw. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to take a deep, shaky breath. If the house was its wellspring, and my despair its current conduit, then the way to sever its connection wasn't to fight it physically, but to starve it, to deny it the very thing it craved, to cut the cord of my own grief. The lights flickered violently, strobing now, creating a disorienting, epileptic nightmare. You are nothing, you are worthless, you are alone. Faces flickered in the windows, ghostly, distorted visages of figures I almost recognized, almost loved. My parents, the colleague. It was all a lie. I pictured the house, not as a decaying tomb, but as a structure, a collection of wood and stone. I saw the energy flowing from it through me into the entity. I had to stop the flow. I had to sever the connection between the house's sorrow and my own. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the bitter coffee, the warm sun, not as memories, but as symbols of life, of defiance. I imagined a sharp, invisible blade, honed by my will, by my refusal to yield. I imagined it cutting through a thick, pulsing cord, a vein of despair that stretched from my chest, through the floor of the subway car, and down into the very foundations of the old house. A guttural roar echoed through the empty subway car. It wasn't a human sound, but something ancient, something enraged. The car rattled violently, throwing me against the seat. The lights died completely, plunging everything into absolute blackness. It was fighting back, trying to maintain its hold. I could feel its tendrils like icy wires, trying to re-establish their connection, trying to find any lingering spark of grief, any flicker of fear. My chest burned, my lungs ached. I could feel something pressing against my throat, something unseen, something immensely powerful. Was it trying to choke me, to smother the last spark of defiance? I pushed back against the cold, against the despair, against the faces. I had to sever the connection between the house and it. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the carving knife I'd hidden beneath the loose floorboard in the study. The blade was dull, rusted, but it was metal. It was tangible. The entity shrieked in my mind, a soundless scream that vibrated through my bones, rattling my teeth. It knew what I intended. It had been feeding on me, on my sorrow, on my isolation, growing stronger with every breath I took inside its walls. Now I was trying to starve it. I didn't know if this would work. I didn't know if a knife, a physical object, could truly touch something so ethereal, so insidious. But I had to try. The house itself seemed to pulse, its timbers groaning, the floorboards beneath my feet vibrating with a low thrum. Dust rained from the ceiling, thick and choking. The air grew heavy like breathing mud. I stumbled into the central hall, the knife clutched tight. The entity was everywhere now, a swirling vortex of shadows and whispers. You let us down. You're weak. You're ours. No, I rasped, the word tearing from my throat, raw and painful. Not anymore. I saw the focal point, the heart of the connection. A sound ripped through the air, a colossal tearing like old canvas splitting or ancient roots being wrenched from the earth. The house shuddered, a violent, convulsive heave that threw me to my knees. The air turned frigid, then scorching, then frigid again. I felt a profound draining, as if a tap had been opened inside me, letting out something vital. My vision blurred. The house groaned one last time, a sigh of release or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. I lay there for an unknown time, shivering, my body aching, my mind a blank, terrified slate. Had I done it? Was it gone? The next thing I knew, I was moving. Not walking, not running, but simply moving. The world was a blur of gray and smeared lights. The scent of damp earth and decay was gone, replaced by the faint tang of ozone and stale air. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent drumbeat behind my eyes. My stomach churned. Each flicker made the metallic surfaces of the car gleam, then disappear. I sat slumped on a hard plastic seat, my hands gripping my knees, gripped tight. I wore the same clothes, stained and torn, that I'd worn in the house. My boots were caked with dried mud. How long had it been? Days? Hours? I had no memory of leaving the house, no recollection of the journey to this place. Just the wrenching, tearing sound, and then this. The car was utterly empty. No other passenger, no driver visible through the grimy window at the front. Just me, the rumble of the wheels on the tracks, and the incessant, unnerving flicker. My breath hitched. A sudden jolt of the car threw me forward, my head snapping back against the seat. Was it truly gone, or had I merely driven it from its nest, only for it to cling to me? A parasite now without a home, feeding on my fear in transit. The train slowed, the screech of metal on metal piercing through the rumbling. The lights flickered faster now, almost a strobe. Outside the window, a glimpse of concrete walls, grimy tiles, a station, no one waiting, no one getting on. Just the stale, still air of the tunnel. Was this my stop? Was this freedom?